The First Crusade was a military campaign called by the Pope conducted by Western Europeans to capture the city of Jerusalem from Muslim control and to aid the Byzantine Empire. It started a series of expeditions to the Holy Land, but its impact was much greater. It unified all of Europe in a way never seen before or since. People from across Europe came together voluntarily to defend their common culture and religion. This created a new form of Western civilization known as Christendom. The First Crusade created a sense of unity that founded Christendom and strengthened Western Europe into a great world power.
The collapse of the Roman Empire in 476 AD paved the way for massive migrations and invasions of Europe by barbarian tribes. After these tribes took root in the lands they conquered, Europe became a collection of tribal city-states in constant conflict with each other, and with little connection from the world outside of Western Europe. Worse still, in the late 600s, Arab pirates and sea raiders set about attacking all merchant vessels and coastal cities across the Mediterranean, reducing many of the great port cities of Europe into mere fishing villages. This had a severe economic impact on the whole Mediterranean world, especially on an already fractured and weakened Western Europe. In the late 8th century, Charlemagne expanded upon the empire of his father and sought to promote Christian unity across Europe. He sent missionaries, converting the many remaining pagan peoples of Europe. He did not believe the distinctions between Franks and Germans were that significant. Instead, he believed all Europeans were united by one Christian faith. However, he could not make all of Europe accept this unity, and at times he was forced to turn toward compulsory measures, to not only acquire converts but also to establish civil order. After his death in 814 and the death of his son Louis the Pious, his empire was fractured into three kingdoms: the kingdom of the Franks, the Holy Roman Empire, and the kingdom of northern Italy. Therefore, Europe was once again disunified. Further still, Europe would be divided by the widespread institution of feudalism. Much more complex than the basic societal pyramid that is commonly depicted, feudalism divided each European kingdom into domains ruled by noble lords of various titles. These lords acted as independent kings in their own realms. They often acted autonomously, and even opposed other lords in the same kingdom, and would oppose their own king. The rise of the knightly class also began to split up these feudal domains further. This not only led to disunity, but also to much violence. At this time, knights were mostly landless soldiers who, in order to pay for their heavy expenses, either stole land from their rivals or resorted to raiding peasants.
After the cycle of conquest and collapse into disunity, a new type of empire began to emerge. Instead of emperors ruling over petty kingdoms and demanding conformity, those kingdoms would work together to defend their culture. They began to recognize their common religion and cultural heritage. This was the dawn of Christendom. Europe forms a coalition, a League of Nations, a European Union before its time. The kingdom that compromises Christendom are working to defend their common interests and promote their culture, but they recognize the authority of the Pope. As historian Geoffrey Barraclough says, the new nations looked to Rome for spiritual leadership. But the Pope also held considerable political influence. Even William the Conqueror waited for a papal blessing before he set sail for England.
The formation of Christendom did not happen because of slowly changing attitudes. It happened as a response to a dire situation in which both Eastern and Western Europe were threatened. Christendom was initiated by a movement called for by a pope and executed by people from all across Europe. This was the First Crusade.
In the late 11th century, the Seljuk Turks conquered great swaths of Byzantine territory and brutalized the native Christians. The Greek Emperor Alexios Komnenos I sent word to Rome asking for aid. While the Pope at the time was unable to respond because of political strife between the Church and the Holy Roman Empire, his successor, Pope Urban II, on the other hand, devoted his energy to the task. In 1095, he convened a council of nobles and clergy at the town of Clermont in modern France. He set before Europe a condemnation of petty rivalries between feudal lords that ruptured the lives of people they had sworn to protect. He told the warring nobles of Europe to redirect their campaigns to a different enemy, an enemy that had devastated Christians' land to the east. He called not just the Franks, not just the ruling lords, not just the knightly class, but all Christians. The 11th century chronicler Fulcher of Charters quotes the Pope commanding that "You as Christ heralds publish this everywhere and persuade all people of whatever rank, foot soldiers and knights, poor and rich, to carry aid promptly to those Christians." And he said, "This to those who were present, and also those who are absent."
God wills it!
The response to this call was phenomenal. Along with some of Europe's most powerful lords, thousands of townfolks and peasants joined the mustering armies that would depart for the Holy Land in the following year. The message spread across Europe, convincing even those who were at first skeptical. Eckhard of Aurach writes about how, though the Germans were arrogant, their fury finally gave way in view of the divine mercy. After meeting at Constantinople, the Crusaders set out, first capturing the city of Nicaea, then thwarting an ambush by the Turks at Dorylaeum, and moving on to seize and defend Antioch. The path to Jerusalem was now clear. Once they reached the Holy City, they faced a severe predicament. As is common in siege warfare, the Muslim defenders ravaged the countryside around Jerusalem, cutting down and burning trees to prevent the Crusaders from using the timber to build siege equipment. The crusade seemed to reach an impasse until ships from the Italian state of Genoa arrived bringing loads of lumber. Though they were not originally part of the campaign, they still desired to help the crusading effort. With this assistance, the Crusaders were able to build siege towers and overrun the walls of the city. Following the rules and conventions of warfare at the time, they proceeded to sack the city, killing some of the inhabitants but ransoming others. The First Crusade had achieved victory. It had reclaimed the Holy City and defended the Byzantine Empire. But the fight for the Holy Land was not over. The Crusaders were surrounded by hostile Muslim powers. Out of both necessity and advantage, they consolidated their foothold by capturing the surrounding cities. They again received logistical and military aid from Italian ships. But following the Siege of Acre, the Muslims set up a naval blockade, cutting off the Crusaders' supply line, until from the north, a line of more Christian ships approached. As they got closer, the Muslims could see the dragon heads on the bows, revealing that these were Viking ships, at which sight the Muslims immediately turned tail and fled in fear of the legendary prowess of the Norsemen. Although it is true that the majority of the Crusaders on the initial campaign of the First Crusade were Frankish in ethnic origin, the Crusade had evolved into a fully international effort, with even the descendants of the pagan Vikings seeking to help the new Kingdom of Jerusalem. The formation of Christendom brought about by the First Crusade temporarily ended the cycle of imperial domination and violent disunity that had pervaded Western Europe since the fall of the Roman Empire. First Crusade was an international effort supported by an accumulation of kingdoms for a common cause. For the first time in history, people from a multitude of nations and ethnic backgrounds volunteered to fight on behalf of another nation. While the First Crusade was fought for the defense of Byzantium, later crusades were all meant to secure the survival of the Crusader Kingdom of Jerusalem. They were led by kings from all over Europe, especially England, France, Germany, and Italy. Even after the fall of the Crusader states, Christendom would defend itself against the Ottoman Empire as late as 1683 with the Battle of Vienna. Even though the Reformation and the Enlightenment brought about the demise of Christendom as an ideal, its impact lasts even to the present. The exchange of ideas between Christian peoples facilitated the Renaissance. The discovery of the Americas can also be tied back to the Crusades. As historian Christopher Tyerman points out, Christopher Columbus's motivations stretched back to Pope Urban II's first call to arms for the Christian reconquest of Jerusalem in 1095. Even the modern European Union follows the precedent that Christendom and the First Crusade set nearly 1,000 years earlier.